Austin, Texas, December 2019. A young mother drops her child at school, returns home with her newborn, and vanishes into silence. A city waking up, cars humming onto familiar roads, parents bundling their children into back seats, coffee shops filling with the quiet rhythm of morning routines. It was a day meant to blend into all the others, a day that held no warnings, no shadows, no reason at all to expect tragedy. Yet tragedies rarely announce themselves. They seep in quietly, slipping into an ordinary moment, rewriting everything that comes after. On this December morning, 20-something mother Heidi Broussard was doing what countless parents were doing across Austin, holding her newborn close, preparing her 6-year-old son for school, navigating sleepless nights with the gentle patience only new mothers understand. Her world revolved around care, love, small tasks, and the soft glow of a new life she had just brought into the world. Nothing in her home hinted at danger. Nothing in her relationships suggested fear. Her days were filled with the laughter of her children, with messages to friends, with the comforting presence of a fiancé who adored her, and with the warm, constant companionship of someone she trusted deeply, a close friend she had known for years. Heidi was the kind of person people described as bright, calm, instantly trustworthy. The kind of mother who placed her children first, who offered warmth easily, and who rarely imagined harm in those around her. Her life, though busy and imperfect like anyone else's, held a simple beauty, the beauty of connection. But in every true crime story, there is a moment. A shift so subtle at first that no one sees the storm forming behind it. That moment came after she returned home from dropping off her son. Nothing dramatic, no outcry, no struggle heard by neighbors, just a sudden, unnatural silence. Hours later, when calls went unanswered, when her voice didn't return, when the door to her apartment stayed closed, concern began to replace routine. Because the disappearance of a mother is different. It strikes at the heart of what we instinctively believe is safe. Mothers anchor families. Their presence is woven into every corner of the day. And when that presence suddenly vanishes, it is not just absence, it is rupture, it is alarm. Her car still sat in the parking lot, her belongings untouched. The newborn she had carried with such devotion, gone with her. For her fiancé, for her friends, for the community that would soon join the growing search, this wasn't simply a missing person report. It was a wound spreading through the city. And at the center of it, a single question that no one knew how to hold. How does a mother and a newborn disappear without a trace? In the days that followed, Austin would find itself pulled into a mystery marked by heartbreak, confusion, and revelations that felt almost impossible to comprehend. But before the country learned the truth, before investigators uncovered the path that led them hundreds of miles away, before a friendship's hidden fractures were exposed, there was only this moment. The morning routine that should have ended with a quiet return home, but instead opened the door to a nightmare. A nightmare that would grow larger, darker, and more shocking with every hour that passed. And within hours, Austin would realize something was terribly wrong.
Heidi Broussard's story did not begin with tragedy. It began with warmth, the kind of warmth that made people naturally trust her, lean toward her, and feel, almost instantly, that she understood them. Born and raised in Louisiana, then building her adult life in Texas, Heidi carried with her a sense of openness that stayed with people long after conversations ended. Friends would later describe her as steady, gentle, and bright in an effortless way, the rare kind of person who made life feel calmer just by being present. She was a young woman navigating the realities of adulthood, working, building a home, raising a child while still holding on to the kindness and sincerity that had always defined her. Nothing in her life was glamorous or dramatic. It was simple, rooted, and full of the ordinary joys that create a meaningful life. But above all, Heidi was a mother. Motherhood was not just the role she carried. It was the center of her identity, the place where she poured her greatest care. Her oldest child, a 6-year-old boy, was the light of her day, a child she nurtured with patience, with tenderness, and with the instinctive devotion that comes naturally to some parents, as if they were made for this purpose. When she discovered she was pregnant again, the joy in her home deepened. Her fiancé, Shane Carey, remembered the glow she carried throughout her pregnancy, a quiet excitement, a sense of fullness, the anticipation of welcoming a daughter. They named her Margot, a name soft enough to match the gentleness of the life they were building. For Heidi, the months after Margot's birth were tender but challenging. The sleepless nights, the constant care, the balancing act between a newborn and a young school-aged child. Yet even in exhaustion, she stayed steady, stayed patient, stayed loving. Those who knew the family saw routine, connection, and a woman devoted wholly to the people she loved. But woven into this circle of her daily life was another bond, a friendship that stretched back years, a friendship she believed was one of the safest parts of her world. Her name was Megan Firamuska. Heidi and Megan had met nearly a decade earlier. They connected quickly, two young women navigating life, relationships, and the growing responsibilities of adulthood. The bond deepened over time. They celebrated each other's milestones, shared news about relationships, supported each other through breakups, and stood together through pregnancy journeys that overlapped. To Heidi, Megan was more than a friend. She was almost family. Their connection had an intimacy built over years, late-night conversations, shared dreams, plans for the future, and the comfortable closeness that comes from believing you know someone completely. Their friends would later say the two were inseparable during certain chapters of their lives, and Heidi trusted her without hesitation. This trust became part of the rhythm of her everyday life, a rhythm filled with small tasks, errands, and moments that rarely felt significant at the time, but would later be examined with a depth and precision no one could have imagined. Her days in Austin were simple. Wake up early, prepare her son for school, care for baby Margot with the devotion of a mother learning her child's every sound, text friends, call family, share updates about newborn life, the fatigue, the joy, the moments of quiet beauty. To the outside world, it was a portrait of a young mother doing her best, with love at the center of everything. Yet beneath the beauty of these ordinary routines was something subtle, something no one recognized at the time, a quiet unease, barely perceptible, like a tremor deep beneath the surface. Because when we revisit the past, when we examine each detail under the weight of what came later, moments that once felt harmless gain new meaning. Patterns shift, conversations look different, and a friendship once seen as unwavering slowly reveals a fragile edge. Still, in December of 2019, no one saw that edge. No one imagined betrayal. No one sensed danger circling the life of a young mother who had just welcomed her second child. Instead, those close to Heidi remember laughter in her home, holidays approaching, decorations being pulled from storage, photos of Margot shared with friends, and the beautiful, chaotic blur that defines life with a newborn. She was tired, the kind of tired that sinks into the bones, yet she was happy, and she remained deeply connected to the people she trusted most, Megan included. They had shared pregnancies before. They had spent years supporting one another. They had lived together at different points in their friendship. They were bound by memories, by faith in one another, and by conversations that stretched into long nights of hopes and frustrations. To Heidi, their friendship was unshakable, a foundation, a familiar comfort amid the challenges of motherhood. The idea that this same friendship could one day become central to a mystery, a disappearance, a heartbreak that would grip a nation, was unimaginable. Heidi's life, leading up to that December morning, held no foreshadowing, no warnings, no threats. She was planning for holidays, preparing for family gatherings, and figuring out how to balance a newborn's needs with a school-aged child's excitement about Christmas break. Her fiancé described their life as normal, loving, and full of plans. They were thinking ahead about raising 2 kids, about birthdays and first steps, about the long, beautiful work of building a family. This was the world she lived in, a world that seemed steady, safe, ordinary. But safety is fragile, trust is delicate, And the deepest betrayals often begin in places we believe are impenetrable. For now, though, before the investigation, before the unanswered calls, before the discoveries that would shatter everything, Heidi was simply a mother, a partner, a friend, and a young woman trying to navigate life with the grace and warmth she carried so naturally. She had no enemies, no conflicts, no reason to feel fear. Her story up until that moment was defined by love. Love for her children, love for her family, and a love for her closest friendships. And it was precisely this trust, this openness, this belief in the goodness of the people around her that made what happened next so devastating, so bewildering, and so impossible for the public to comprehend. Because when tragedy touches a life like Heidi's, a life full of gentleness, it forces us to confront something deeply unsettling, that darkness can hide in the familiar, that danger can wear the face of someone we trust, and that love, the very thing that brings people together, can sometimes blind us to the shadows forming quietly behind it. This was Heidi's world, full of devotion, connection, and trust, all of it moving steadily toward a morning that would change everything forever.
The final day of Heidi Broussard's life began the way countless mornings begin for mothers everywhere, with exhaustion in her bones, love in her hands, and responsibility guiding her every movement. December 12th, 2019, a Thursday. Cool air drifting across Austin. A quiet routine unfolding inside a small apartment shared by Heidi, her fiancé Shane, their newborn Margot, and their young son. Inside those walls, life looked peaceful, the kind of peacefulness built from shared effort, late-night feedings, groggy mornings, and the constant balancing act of raising two children. Nothing about the sunrise suggested danger. Nothing foreshadowed loss. The day began, as always, with the needs of her children. Margot, only weeks old, had stirred before dawn, pulling Heidi from already fragile sleep. But for a mother, exhaustion often becomes second nature, absorbed into the rhythm of care. She fed the baby, soothed her, held her close to her chest in the soft light of morning. Her older child, full of the energy that defines 6-year-olds, moved through the early routine of shoes, backpack, quick breakfast. Heidi helped him get ready for school with the quiet efficiency of a mother who has learned how to move through fatigue with grace. There was nothing unusual in her tone, nothing hurried, no sign of fear or tension. This was simply life, ordinary, tender, predictable. A little after 7 a.m., Heidi gathered her son, slipped Margot into her car seat, and stepped out into the cool morning. The drive to the elementary school was short, just a few minutes from home, a route she took every weekday. Surveillance cameras captured her arrival at the school. She looked calm, maternal, focused on her boy as she walked him inside the building. One of the last images the world would ever see of her alive. She left the school parking lot and headed home, a simple drive through familiar streets, one she'd traveled dozens of times since Margot's birth. At around 7:50 a.m., neighbors recall seeing Heidi return to her apartment. There was nothing unusual about her arrival. No raised voices, no disturbance, no sign that anything was wrong. Inside, the apartment was still. Shane had already left for work earlier that morning. The rooms were quiet except for the soft sounds of a newborn breathing, shifting, settling. For the next several hours, Heidi's day becomes a series of small, intimate moments, moments that now formed the final known hours of her life. She carried Margot, moved through the apartment, sent a few normal texts, communicated with friends and family without any hint of fear or distress. She did what mothers do on quiet mornings, organized small things, checked pockets of the house, prepared for lunch, rocked her newborn gently as the hours passed. There was no interruption, no disruption, just the soft pulse of routine. But sometime between late morning and early afternoon, something changed. A break in the timeline. A silence that investigators would later examine in painstaking detail. Heidi was seen at the apartment complex by at least one witness before noon, holding her newborn, bundled in blankets. Normal, calm. Nothing about her demeanor suggested unease. But after that moment, Heidi was not seen again. No one at the apartment complex heard an argument. No one reported a struggle. No witnesses described anything alarming. It was as if the ordinary rhythm of her mourning simply dissolved. Around 1 p.m., her fiancé Shane finished work and began the drive home. This was part of their routine. He would check in during the early afternoon, help with Margot so Heidi could rest, and share the daily responsibilities of raising 2 children. He called her, a familiar pattern, but she didn't pick up. He texted, no reply. At first, it didn't feel alarming. New mothers often sleep unexpectedly. They close their eyes for a moment and drift into deep, necessary rest. He imagined she was napping with the baby. He imagined she hadn't heard the phone. But as he pulled into the apartment complex that afternoon, something felt off. Her car was there, parked exactly where she had left it. The baby's car seat still inside. Her purse inside the home. All signs pointing to the same undeniable truth. She had not gone anywhere by choice. Shane stepped into the apartment expecting to hear soft music, or the low cry of the baby, or the sound of his partner moving through her day. Instead, silence. No Heidi. No newborn. No sign of where they had gone. The instinctive pulse of worry began. He walked room to room, checking spaces where she might be resting, searching for any clue that she was safe. But the apartment felt wrong. Too still. Too quiet. Too empty. He called again. Again. No answer. Minutes passed that felt like hours. He reached out to Heidi's mother. Then to friends. The confusion deepened as each phone call produced the same response. No, I haven't heard from her. This was the moment where uncertainty turned into fear. Because mothers do not simply disappear. Not with a newborn. Not without their car. Not without their phone. Not without a word. The timeline investigators would later reconstruct became a series of jarring contrasts. A peaceful morning, a predictable routine, a mother returning home. Then, nothing. By mid-afternoon, a cloud of dread began to form over the small Austin apartment. Shane began contacting more people, trying to understand the impossible, trying to find a reason, any reason that would explain why Heidi wasn't responding. There was none. He began to search the apartment complex, walking the parking lot, looking between cars, scanning every corner, calling her phone again and again. No ring, no sound, no trace. What remained was a growing, heavy truth. A mother and a newborn had vanished into thin air. And as the minutes turned into hours, the shock spread outward, first to family, then to friends, then to the community, and eventually to the entire nation. This was not a story that fit into any familiar pattern. This was not a disappearance shaped by conflict or crisis. This was a rupture at the center of ordinary life. A mother, a newborn, gone. And the timeline, though reconstructed with precision, could not answer the one question echoing through every person who loved Heidi. How does someone vanish so completely, in the middle of the day, from the safety of their home, with no witnesses, no struggle, and no warning? The hours after her disappearance became a vacuum, a void filled with rising panic, confusion, and the creeping fear that something unimaginable had taken place. A fear that would soon grow into the largest missing person search Austin had seen in years. But at this moment, in the quiet, still apartment where her car sat untouched and her belongings remained exactly where she left them, there were only 2 truths. She should have been here, and she wasn't. Everything that followed, the calls to police, the interviews, the nationwide coverage, the discoveries that would shatter the country, would begin from this moment of breathless uncertainty, the moment when the world first realized that something had gone terribly, terribly wrong.
The disappearance of a mother and her newborn is not a quiet event. It begins quietly, yes, with unanswered calls, with a creeping unease in the pit of the stomach, with a silence that feels heavier than it should. But soon, that quiet concern transforms. It widens, deepens, pulls more and more people into its gravity. For Heidi Broussard, that transformation began on the afternoon of December 12, 2019, when the first realization hit the people who loved her. She wasn't where she should be. She wasn't doing what she always did. She wasn't reachable. And mothers, especially mothers of newborns, are always reachable. Inside the Austin apartment, the air felt wrong. Nothing was overturned, nothing broken, nothing disturbed. Her belongings remained where she left them, her purse, her ID, her essentials. Everything pointed to a place frozen mid-routine. But the two most important pieces were missing: Heidi and her infant daughter Margot. The vacuum of answers grew heavier by the minute. Shane searched again, looking inside closets, behind doors, in the corners of the apartment, as if she might somehow appear. He stepped outside, scanning the parking lot, checking the spaces between cars. He spoke with neighbors, trying to piece together anything, any detail that might explain why a mother walked out of her home and didn't return. But no detail came. No neighbor recalled seeing her after the late morning. No one heard a noise. No disturbance was reported. No car speeding away. No stranger lingering nearby. It was as if the day had swallowed her whole. By mid-afternoon, the tone of the situation shifted. Concern had become fear, the quiet, rising fear that something was deeply wrong. Family members began making calls. Friends were notified. Everyone who knew Heidi was suddenly confronted with a truth they didn't know how to process. She was gone, and she had taken nothing with her. The first call to police came soon after. Not a dramatic emergency cry, but the controlled, urgent message of someone who knew the situation was not normal. Austin police responded quickly. They entered the apartment, walked through each room, and saw what the family already understood. This was not a voluntary disappearance. A mother who simply steps out does not leave her car. She does not leave her purse. She does not leave her newborn's essential items behind. And she does not fail to contact anyone for hours. The officers noted the intact conditions of the home. No forced entry, no clear sign of struggle, no indication that Heidi packed or prepared to leave. Everything, absolutely everything, suggested she had intended to return immediately after dropping off her son that morning. Police began their questioning with calm but increasing concern. When did anyone last see her? Who had she spoken to? Were there issues at home? Was she under unusual stress? Did she have conflicts with anyone? Again and again, the same answers came. No, no, no. Her life was ordinary, stable, full of love for her children. There was no reason for her to vanish. As afternoon shifted into evening, the search expanded. Neighbors were interviewed. Phones were checked. The apartment complex was canvassed thoroughly. Officers walked door to door, asking residents if they had seen Heidi or the tiny bundle of blankets that was her newborn daughter. No one had. Her phone, a critical piece of the puzzle, was unreachable. No pings, no activity, no movement through the city's cell towers. The digital silence only deepened the fear. For law enforcement, missing adult cases often begin with the possibility of voluntary departure. But in this case, that possibility disappeared almost immediately. Mothers do not disappear with newborns, not without preparation, not without taking a single item, not without a trace. By early evening on December 12th, Austin police shifted the case from a missing mother to a potentially endangered one. Detectives arrived. Crime scene units documented the apartment. Even though no signs of violence were present, every detail mattered. Every drawer, every footprint, every item that was or wasn't in its place. Family members gathered outside the apartment complex, some pacing, some crying, some still clinging to the hope that this was a misunderstanding that would resolve itself within the hour. But as the sun set over Austin, and as the night began to stretch across the city, that hope became harder to hold. The official missing persons bulletin was issued soon after. It spread quickly across local news stations, social media, and neighborhood forums. The headlines struck a chilling contrast. Missing mother and newborn, last seen in Austin. Her photo, bright, warm, smiling, filled screens across the region. Beside her image was the tiny face of baby Margot, only weeks old, wrapped in the soft blanket she'd been seen carrying. The community response was immediate. People shared her photo thousands of times within hours. Local groups organized tips and theories. Volunteers offered to help search. Parents across the city whispered the same question: how can a mother and newborn simply vanish? The next morning, December 13th, law enforcement held a briefing. It was clear they understood the urgency. This was not the kind of case that could wait for developments. Every hour mattered. Search teams began combing the areas surrounding the apartment complex. Nearby parks, wooded areas, trails, and open spaces were inspected. Drones were deployed. Officers walked through brush and creek beds, looking for any indication of movement or disturbance. The community began to join in, posting sightings, analyzing maps, watching for anything unusual. The story quickly reached national media outlets. Within a day, the disappearance was no longer just a local concern. It had become a national mystery. How could a mother, who had been seen just hours earlier performing normal daily tasks, disappear without leaving a footprint? Where could she have gone? And who had the means and the opportunity to take her and her newborn daughter? As reporters covered the case, as detectives followed leads, as volunteers searched neighborhoods, the sense of unease continued to grow. Investigators knew the answer would not be simple. It would not be clean, and it would likely lead them beyond Austin. Inside the police department, detectives began analyzing phone records. They examined messages, call logs, social media, the timeline of her last known movements. They pulled surveillance videos from the elementary school, the apartment complex, nearby businesses, and every camera that faced the surrounding streets. Piece by piece, they were building a picture of the final known hours of her life, a puzzle that for now seemed to contain more empty spaces than clues. But one detail stood out immediately. There was no evidence Heidi had left the apartment complex in her own vehicle, and the idea that someone had taken her and the baby became more plausible with every passing hour. Day turned into night again. Another 24 hours gone. Still no trace of Heidi, still no trace of Margot. Her family pleaded publicly for her safe return. The community watched anxiously. Law enforcement intensified their efforts. The air around the case grew thick with fear, uncertainty, and a sense of looming tragedy. Something terrible had happened. Everyone knew it, but no one yet understood how deep this mystery went or how close to home the answers actually were. The disappearance of Heidi Broussard wasn't just a missing person case. It was the beginning of a story that would unravel trust, expose hidden intentions, and reveal a truth that would stun even seasoned investigators. The world didn't yet know it, but the path toward that truth had already begun.
The investigation into the disappearance of Heidi Broussard and her newborn daughter quickly evolved from a routine missing person inquiry into a complex, multi-layered search that demanded the full attention of Austin law enforcement, who, from the moment they entered her apartment on December 12th, recognized that something was deeply wrong. There was no forced entry, no overturned furniture, no visible signs of a struggle, no trail of movement inside or outside the home, and yet the two people most central to the stability of that household, a mother and her infant, were simply gone, leaving behind a stillness that did not align with any rational explanation, prompting detectives to begin the methodical and often painstaking work of reconstructing her final hours, interviewing everyone close to her, combing through phone records, analyzing surveillance footage, and trying to determine how a woman so rooted in her routine could vanish so completely. In those first crucial days, police spoke with her fiancé,
with neighbors, with coworkers, and with the people who formed her inner circle, gathering insight into her habits, her relationships, her emotional state, and any recent developments that might shed light on her disappearance. Yet, overwhelmingly, they heard the same portrait repeated again and again. Heidi was a devoted mother, a loving partner, a woman with stable friendships, no known conflicts, and no history of impulsive behavior that would suggest she left voluntarily. Her life revolved around her children, her family, and the comforting rhythm of everyday tasks, leaving investigators with no clear motive, no obvious enemy, and no initial suspect. Detectives began expanding their search outward, from the apartment complex to the surrounding neighborhoods, parks, wooded areas, and roadways, ruling out the possibility that Heidi had suffered a medical emergency nearby or had collapsed somewhere outside the home. And when those searches yielded nothing, their focus shifted back to digital forensics, where they analyzed her cell phone history, text messages, call logs, and social media interactions. To their concern, her phone activity ended abruptly late that morning, with no further pings, no outgoing messages, and no signs that the device had moved anywhere on its own, a digital silence that deepened the urgency of the case. Investigators turned to surveillance cameras around the city, the school where she dropped off her son, the roads leading back to her apartment, gas stations, stores, and any business whose cameras pointed toward routes she commonly traveled, piecing together her last confirmed movements, while simultaneously gathering statements from people she interacted with that morning. As each hour passed without answers, police widened their scope, interviewing more distant acquaintances and individuals who had interacted with her socially or through parent networks, searching for inconsistencies or overlooked details. And among the people questioned was a woman deeply intertwined in Heidi's life, her longtime friend Megan Firamuska, someone who had known her for years, someone who appeared devastated by the disappearance, someone who cooperated when asked to share information about recent conversations, visits, or changes in Heidi's behavior. At the time, investigators noted nothing alarming, nothing incriminating, nothing that stood out enough to redirect the focus of the investigation. Still, they documented every detail carefully, understanding that relationships often hold keys that only become visible in hindsight. Days passed and leads arrived with the relentless speed common to high-profile missing person cases. Tips poured in from across Texas, sightings of women with infants, neighbors reporting unfamiliar vehicles, strangers claiming they recognized the missing mother from news broadcasts. And every tip, no matter how improbable, required officers to track it down, verify the location, interview witnesses, and confirm whether the information held weight. Yet one after another, the leads dissolved into nothing, consuming critical time as the clock continued to tick. Family members pleaded publicly for Heidi's safe return, tearfully asking the community to stay vigilant, to share her photo, to help in any way possible. And the public responded with remarkable intensity, spreading the missing person alert across social media, organizing volunteer search groups, and amplifying awareness to a national scale. Still, even with enormous visibility, no credible sightings emerged. Behind the scenes, investigators revisited the timeline repeatedly, refining it with every scrap of information they collected. The school drop-off time, the window in which neighbors saw her return home, the last text she sent, the moment her digital footprint went silent, the time her fiancé arrived home to find her missing, the calls made to friends, and the exact minutes at which people attempted, unsuccessfully, to reach her. They constructed a detailed minute-by-minute reconstruction of the morning, hoping discrepancies would reveal the truth, but the timeline oddly reinforced the mystery. Everything in Heidi's life appeared painfully normal until, without warning, her presence simply ceased. Detectives also began to re-examine every statement given by those close to her, looking not for overt deception, but for subtle inconsistencies, differences in phrasing, shifts in memory, timelines that didn't perfectly align. Most interviews remained consistent and credible, but one or two conversations drew their attention, not because the individuals acted suspiciously, but because certain details seemed slightly misaligned with recorded evidence, though not enough to accuse or confront directly. Investigators also noted the unusual parallel between Heidi's recent pregnancy and claims made by others in her orbit, a detail that, at the time, seemed more coincidental than consequential,
but planted a seed of curiosity that would later become pivotal. Meanwhile, detectives studied vehicle movements around the apartment complex through available surveillance feeds, logging license plates, time-stamped entries and exits, and tracking unfamiliar cars to determine whether they had a plausible connection to the disappearance. Still, no definitive lead surfaced. It was a period defined by relentless work and repeated frustration. Officers followed every logical path only to find themselves circling back to the same unanswered question: how could a mother and newborn vanish midday without leaving behind evidence of their departure? As the investigation pressed into its second week, detectives began focusing more heavily on phone data, not only Heidi's but also the phones of people close to her, comparing locations, timestamps, call patterns, and movements across the Austin area. Data analysts mapped cell tower connections, identifying where each device had been during crucial windows of time. And although the initial round of analysis produced little clarity, a more detailed review began revealing small but significant anomalies, including movements that did not align with statements given, travel patterns that seemed unusual, and overlaps in location data that, while not yet conclusive, suggested certain individuals may have been closer to the unfolding events than initially believed. Investigators revisited interviews, armed with these new observations, pressing gently but firmly, watching for changes in demeanor or hesitation. Yet even then, answers remained evasive, not necessarily deceitful, but incomplete, as though the full truth had not yet surfaced. Meanwhile, investigators tracked down every store receipt, every camera timestamp, every possible digital trace connected to people in Heidi's life, a monumental effort designed to reduce the unknowns. Yet even with hundreds of hours of combined work, the case remained frustratingly opaque. As media attention grew, national outlets highlighted the strangeness of the disappearance: a mother vanishing with a newborn during daylight hours, a home left undisturbed, no sign of struggle, no obvious suspect. And public pressure on law enforcement increased, with communities across the country joining the collective hope that Heidi and Margot would be found alive. Inside the police department, officers felt that pressure deeply. They reviewed the evidence nightly, rewriting investigative theories on whiteboards, challenging assumptions, and cross-checking every piece of information that had the slightest chance of illuminating the truth. But for all their efforts, the overwhelming majority of leads led nowhere, forcing detectives to acknowledge an unsettling reality. Someone knew exactly what happened, and they were not talking. Still, through the fog of dead ends, one pattern slowly began to emerge, a pattern woven quietly into digital footprints, overlapping travel paths, and inconsistencies too faint to ignore. A pattern that, when analyzed closely, pointed investigators toward a location far outside Austin and toward a person whose connection to Heidi was deep, long-standing, and built on a foundation that no one, not even Heidi, ever imagined would fracture. And though detectives did not yet have the breakthrough they needed, they were edging closer to a truth that would soon shatter the case open, a truth waiting just beyond the final, painful series of dead ends.
The breakthrough in the disappearance of Heidi Broussard and her newborn daughter came not from a dramatic eyewitness account or a sudden confession, but from the slow, meticulous, and emotionally draining process of piecing together digital breadcrumbs, overlapping cell phone data, and fragments of surveillance footage that, when finally aligned, revealed a chilling truth investigators had not initially considered. Someone extremely close to Heidi, someone woven deeply into the fabric of her daily life, had been moving in and out of the investigative frame with an unusual pattern, one that grew more alarming with every new layer of analysis. And as detectives revisited every moment of the timeline, every call, every text, every location ping from the morning of December 12th, they realized that the phone belonging to her longtime friend, Margot, had been in the proximity of Heidi's apartment at critical windows of time, lingering near the complex during hours she had not accounted for, and later traveling in a direction inconsistent with her initial statements, raising intense suspicion among investigators, who were now convinced that the answers to the case lay not in random chance or a predatory stranger, but in examining the actions and movements of someone Heidi trusted implicitly. Detectives began pulling deeper digital records connected to Firamuska, phone logs, text activity, timeline reconstructions, and historical travel patterns, and the data painted a picture far more disturbing than anyone had imagined, suggesting she may have followed or shadowed Heidi on specific days leading up to the disappearance. And although investigators approached these findings cautiously, avoiding public speculation, they understood that they were on the verge of uncovering a motive and a method that would soon explain why both mother and newborn vanished without struggle, without noise, and without any visible break-in. Phone pings from that morning placed Firamuska near Heidi's apartment not once, but multiple times, and further analysis showed her device traveling from Austin toward the Houston area shortly after the time frame in which Heidi disappeared, a journey that investigators could not ignore. They followed this digital trail to a residence in Jersey Village, a suburban area just outside Houston, a home associated with Firamuska and her boyfriend, a place that suddenly, chillingly, matched several elements detectives had been searching for, including the possibility that Margot, the missing newborn, could still be alive. As the digital evidence grew more compelling, investigators coordinated with Houston area law enforcement and prepared to execute a search that would require extraordinary caution. After all, this was not a suspect known for violence or criminal behavior, but rather someone close to the victim, someone who had played the role of supportive friend throughout the early days of the disappearance, someone whose proximity to the family made the betrayal, if confirmed, nearly unbearable to process. The Houston property was placed under quiet surveillance, with officers observing movements, visitors, cars entering and exiting, and any signs that an infant was inside. They monitored activities for hours, marking timestamps and noting behaviors that only strengthened the belief that this home was intrinsically linked to the disappearance. When search teams and investigators finally approached the residence on December 19, 2019, 1 week after Heidi vanished, the tension was palpable. Officers entering the property were prepared for the worst, yet hoping desperately to find the infant alive, and the discovery they made confirmed both their fears and their hopes. Inside the home, they found a newborn matching Margot's description, physically unharmed, appearing healthy, alive, and desperately in need of immediate medical evaluation. And while DNA confirmation would be required to establish her identity, investigators knew instantly that they had found Heidi's daughter. The relief among officers was profound, yet overshadowed by the unfolding tragedy. Because during the search, they also located a silver Nissan belonging to Firamuska, and inside its trunk, hidden beneath a blanket, they discovered the body of Heidi Broussard, deceased, her life stolen abruptly and cruelly, her remains concealed in a vehicle parked outside a home she had visited in friendship many times before. The discovery shattered any remaining doubt about what had happened, and the emotional weight of the moment rippled through both the investigative team and the broader community. The missing mother had been found, but not in the way anyone had hoped, and the betrayal at the center of the case was deeper and more devastating than detectives had anticipated. Firamuska was arrested at the scene and taken into custody. Her behavior during the arrest was described in public records as evasive, confused, and resistant to acknowledging the reality of the situation. Investigators conducted hours of follow-up interviews, gathering information about her recent actions, her fabricated claims of pregnancy, and her attempts to present the newborn found in her home as her own child, all of which aligned with a grim narrative that suggested extensive premeditation and a manipulation of trust that left family, friends, and the nation stunned. Austin police held a press conference outlining the discovery, revealing that the newborn was alive, that the mother had been found deceased, and that a suspect, someone deeply connected to the victim, was in custody. And as these details spread, shockwaves traveled through the national media, which had been following the disappearance with growing urgency. News outlets across the country reported on the devastating turn of events, highlighting not only the tragic loss of Heidi's life, but also the miraculous survival of baby Margot, who, despite the trauma surrounding her first weeks of life, was safe and expected to recover.
Medical professionals evaluated the infant at a Houston hospital, while investigators documented the crime scene, processed the vehicle, and collected forensic evidence from both the car and the home, working carefully to preserve every detail that might later be used in court. The charges against Firamusca included kidnapping and tampering with a corpse, with the expectation that additional charges would follow as the investigation continued. Prosecutors from Travis County began preparing the foundation for what would eventually become a case centered not only on digital and physical evidence, but also on a psychological portrait of deception, manipulation, and obsession that had remained hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly ordinary friendship. The breakthrough, the uncovering of the Jersey Village residence, the location of Margot, the recovery of Heidi's body, brought clarity to a week-long mystery that had consumed Texas and captured the attention of the nation. Yet the emotional toll it left behind was profound. Family members were crushed, investigators shaken, and communities across the country grieved a mother whose final moments had been stolen by someone she had once trusted. As law enforcement transported the infant safely back to her father, and as Heidi's family began the devastating process of confronting their loss, detectives revisited every earlier interview, every movement, every hesitation, now seeing clearly the signs that had been nearly invisible in the early days of the disappearance. The truth had emerged, stark and undeniable, and with Firamusca in custody, investigators knew the case had crossed from uncertainty into resolution, though the emotional wound left by the revelation would remain long after the legal proceedings concluded.
The arrest marked the point at which the narrative shifted from a desperate search to a pursuit of justice, propelled by the heartbreaking reality that one woman's trust in a friend had been exploited in the most unthinkable way. And now, law enforcement and the legal system carried the responsibility of ensuring accountability for a crime that had left a profound scar on the hearts of all who followed Heidi's story.
In the aftermath of the discovery in Jersey Village, the emotional landscape surrounding the disappearance and murder of Heidi Broussard transformed from frantic uncertainty into a heavy, collective reckoning, as her family, friends, and the broader public struggled to comprehend the magnitude of a betrayal that shattered not only a trusted friendship, but also the delicate framework of safety people assume exists in their closest relationships. In the days that followed, grief mingled with outrage as her loved ones navigated the indescribable pain of losing a mother, daughter, partner, and friend, while simultaneously caring for the newborn whose survival had become a symbol of resilience amid devastation. And as law enforcement released additional details about the investigation, the public's understanding of the case evolved into something even more heartbreaking. A story not of random violence or unpredictable danger, but of a calculated breach of trust carried out by someone Heidi had welcomed into her life with warmth, compassion, and unwavering faith. Court proceedings began slowly, as they often do in cases of such magnitude, with prosecutors carefully compiling the extensive evidence gathered from both Austin and Houston, including digital data tracing the suspect's movements, forensic analysis from the vehicle and residence, and interviews that painted a portrait of a deeply disturbing deception. Each new procedural step forced the family to relive portions of the tragedy, attending hearings, providing statements, and standing strong in the shadow of a crime that had taken someone irreplaceable from them. As the case moved through the legal system, experts across the country, criminal psychologists, legal analysts, social commentators, reflected publicly on what made the story so haunting: the stolen identity, the fabricated pregnancy, the emotional manipulation, and the calculated manner in which trust was exploited, all of it illustrating how vulnerability can be weaponized in ways that defy intuition and challenge society's assumptions about danger. Yet, through all of this public dissection, what remained central was not the crime itself, but the life that had been lost, the bright presence that no courtroom could restore, the mother whose love radiated outwards and shaped every space she inhabited.
Those who knew Heidi spoke of her not as a victim, but as a woman who lived her life with kindness, gentleness, and unwavering devotion to her children. And their tributes became a reminder that cases like hers are not defined solely by tragedy, but by the humanity of the people at their center. Baby Margot's safe recovery brought a measure of hope amid heartbreak, and as she was reunited with her father and extended family, the image of the tiny newborn, alive, protected, and surrounded by love, became a focal point of collective relief, a reminder that even in the darkest chapters of human behavior, life can emerge against all odds. Still, the emotional weight of knowing what had been taken from her before she was even old enough to remember it remained heavy on the hearts of those who understood the deeper implications of the crime. Over the next several years, the legal proceedings progressed slowly but steadily, culminating in 2023 when Megan Firamuska pleaded guilty to the murder of Heidi Broussard, a plea that validated the extensive investigative work conducted by law enforcement and offered the family a measure of closure, even though closure in cases like these is never complete. The courtroom, filled with quiet tension, witnessed the formal acknowledgement of responsibility for a crime that had reverberated across the nation. And as the sentence was handed down, a 55-year prison term, it marked the end of a legal journey, but not the end of the emotional impact, which would continue shaping the lives of everyone connected to Heidi for years to come. In the wake of the sentencing, her family spoke of healing as a slow, uneven process, one built not on forgetting, but on remembering, honoring, and preserving the warmth and generosity that defined her life. They focused on raising her children with the same love she had poured into them, ensuring that Margot, despite the circumstances of her earliest days, would grow up knowing the truth not as a weight of darkness, but as a testament to her mother's strength and the community's unwavering commitment to her safety. The Austin community, still shaken by the events, organized memorial gatherings, vigils, and moments of reflection, choosing to remember Heidi not through the lens of tragedy, but through the legacy of love she left behind, a legacy made visible in the faces of her children, in the voices of her friends, and in the collective promise that her story would not fade into silence. Nationally, her case contributed to important conversations about trust, maternal vulnerability, and the unseen risks that sometimes hide behind familiarity, prompting experts to explore how communities can better protect expectant and new mothers from forms of manipulation that often go unnoticed until it is too late. These conversations, though painful, served as a reminder that tragedies sometimes illuminate hidden dangers, urging society to look more closely, listen more carefully, and act more protectively toward those whose lives hinge on trust. For investigators who worked tirelessly to solve the case, the memory of the breakthrough, the moment they found Margot alive and uncovered the truth that had eluded them for days, remained one of the most emotionally charged points of their careers, a fusion of relief and sorrow that underscored the immense responsibility carried by those who devote their lives to searching for the missing. Their reflections on the case often returned to the importance of small clues, the significance of revisiting assumptions, and the critical role of persistence in uncovering truths that are deeply concealed. To those who followed the case from a distance, who watched news coverage, who shared posts, who prayed for a safe outcome, the story left a lasting impression about the fragility of trust and the resilience of families confronted with unimaginable loss. It reminded people everywhere that behind every headline is a person, a life, a network of loved ones whose worlds are permanently altered when tragedy strikes, and that justice, while necessary, can never fully repair the wound left behind. Yet in the midst of heartbreak, one message emerged with clarity, that remembering Heidi, speaking her name, and honoring her story became acts of collective compassion, anchoring her memory in the hearts of those who never met her but were touched by her life. And as the years pass,
as her children grow, as her family navigates the complicated landscape of grief and healing, the commitment to preserving her legacy remains unwavering, fueled by the belief that stories like hers must continue to be told, not only to honor her life, but to remind the world of the profound value of trust, the enduring strength of community, and the need to look out for one another with vigilance and care. Share this story. Keep her memory alive. Because justice is not just a verdict, it is the promise that a life will never be forgotten.